Morning, everyone. Welcome to the General Government Committee meeting. The date is Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and the time is 8 a.m. as we are convening here. We'll start with a call to order, and now the roll call. I'm joined by Councilmember Leatta Dahlhoff, and I'm Councilmember Michael Althauser. And Councilmember Joan Cathy is actually excused this morning, so you get just the two of us today. Our first order of business is approval of the meeting minutes from our October 9th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And I'll second. It's a motion by Councilmember Dahlhoff and seconded by myself, Councilmember Althauser. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. So that moves us to our substantive agenda, but we are going to move things around a little bit. We're going to start with the food system plan update first, so that our friends who are briefing us on this don't have to wait through the rest of the agenda just to get to that one item. So we'll go ahead and start with that one. Brad, can you help us with a brief introduction before we pass it over to Rebecca?
Yes, so if you remember last year, the city council included the preparation of a city food system plan in our 24 work plan. And the intent of the system plan was to start to address some community concerns with food insecurity on the local level. We're working with our consultant, Rebecca, who will give a presentation on the initial stages of the work to prepare a plan that focuses on ways of supporting access to food more effectively and to consider the role of local and community-based agricultural activities. This also really is a good time because it builds on all the work we're doing to update the comprehensive plan, especially the conservation element, which includes an urban agricultural chapter. Really, the intent of the plan is to focus on how we can better provide healthy food in the community, ways to reduce food waste, support local food processing, and identify gaps in the current system and how we can work with jurisdictional and community partners to address those things. So with this first meeting before the General Government Committee, the focus is really on describing the plan preparation process, reviewing the stakeholder list that Rebecca has prepared, and as well as the questions that she would like to ask those stakeholders. We would be coming back to the General Government Committee probably early next year to talk about the results of those conversations and the next steps in the process. So I think Rebecca.
Yeah, great. Hello. Brad let me know I had about 20 minutes, so I want to be very efficient with your time. And I'd like to also, since I provided materials ahead of time, I don't want to waste your time if you've had a chance to read them and don't have questions. But if you haven't had a chance or have questions or want me to walk you through that, I'm happy to. The meat of what I wanted to do this morning with you, if this works for you, is really engage you in a conversation about the subject matter expert stakeholders that I identified. But if we want to go back and just sort of review the overall project, I'm also happy to do that. So let me know what works best for your needs this morning.
Yeah, so I think Councilmember Dahlhoff, we do have a hard stop this morning at 8:55. Is that right for your clock? So I think 20 minutes is should probably suffice because some of the other agenda items are pretty quick. I think thank you for sending the materials. I think just so that members of the public who may have not be familiar with those or familiar with it would probably appreciate sort of a brief kind of high level sort of intro along the lines that you've described, just so that we can be transparent about that and they have additional context.
Right. So as Brad described the goals of the project, I have a background and I've done work in our community in food systems. So I bring those connections to this work in trying to devise a plan for a municipality the size of Tumwater and doing a food system plan and trying to make it the strategies in the plan, things that are going to be effective things that a municipality can do. So I really want to focus on that in my stakeholder engagement. Since it had been given to me that some of the areas that you all were interested in had to do with food security, but also processing, production, and food waste. When I was trying to compile a list of subject matter experts, I kept those things in mind. So my plan is that checking in with you all and the Planning Commission about the subject matter experts that I've identified. If you feel like that list is complete, yes.
Oh, Rebecca, finish your sentence and your thought. I raised my hand so I don't forget that when you're done, I have a question. Keep going.
Okay. Wanting your input and the Planning Commission's input on those people that I've identified. Basically working with them to develop an assessment of where things are at right now. What's the state of the food system? Make an assessment. So the first part of the plan will be an analysis of that, using that work to identify what are the opportunities and the constraints. And then the next phase of the project, so after we get this community assessment, is developing what the goals are for the city's plan and strategies to get there. So this first phase would be me engaging in conversation, like one-on-one conversation, but then also because of constraints of time, doing some things like surveys so I can gather a bunch of information more quickly.
Rebecca, is now a good time to, okay,
Sure.
perfect. I appreciate that. The one thing when I was reviewing that stood out is regarding subject matter experts and like, where are the people who are actually accessing it? So the one person that was missing was Leanne Perry with the Little Free Pantries, which there's been an ongoing process since the pandemic to get the city of Tumwater to adopt the Little Free Pantries like the lending libraries. So I'm wondering if that is also your scope of, I know you had those list of elements, and accessibility is a big one for me. And so the other one is Pastor Johnson at Mountain View Church, who has one of the locations for the Little Free Pantry, but also does food distribution with the food bank as well. And so I'm wondering along those lines of, with the subject matter experts, are there people on the other, like on that pipeline, that continuum of work that are experiencing those pain points, right? That's what they're experiencing of trying to get food, of the time and the availability and the types of food and the cultural options available. And that led me to, we do have with the Little Free Pantry, there's a food pantry in a manufactured home park in their mailbox. So also when you're talking about that, like accessibility and shame and stigma of some people of not wanting to go get food or lack of access to get food, what would it look like to have in certain areas a spot? That makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you for, I believe that I had Mountain View Church on I have a much bigger spreadsheet that I was working with. And one thing that I was noting is having a little bit of a hard time knowing what food distribution sites are active now without reaching out to them. So one thing that I wanted to do is, as I reach out, especially to the food bank, to get a list of their all their different satellites. And I do have a list of quite a few religious institutions that are doing things. So I will, as you may have noticed in one of my questions, it's like, who else should I talk to?
Yeah,
so
I love that.
I want to be really broad about that. And you do bring up a good point about asking people directly who are accessing food. And I think what I'd like to do is work with some of those food distribution sites to figure out what's the best way to engage with folks at accessing those sites in ways where I'm going to get meaningful participation. So yes, I'm taking a note, and I will definitely add that. And I appreciate you naming some very specific people, because I feel like that's one thing I'm looking for you all is I am engaged in this community. I'm not as engaged in the same way that you are within the city of Tumwater. So please, if you have more very specific suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
And I think just on the Mountain View Church, for example, we have done outreach there for various other things as part of the food distribution. So I think they would be open to having discussions or facilitating level of discussions there.
Perfect.
The other question I had, Rebecca, is our fire station T1 used to be a location for food. It had a little bank. It was like a closet where people would come in and get food. And then that was closed down during the pandemic and is not restarted again for various reasons, retirement, access, availability, right? But is that also an option? Should that come back again, or what does that look like for responders and calls and access and seeing other needs? What does that look like?
Perfect. Are there any other things that stand out to you that are missing? And I realize the other thing, and maybe I could put it in the chat or Brad could send it out. The document I prepared for you, I realized later, does not include my contact information. Should you want to get a hold of me later, if you have an aha moment and want to reach out to me, I think that I don't have that. Brad, is there a way you could share that with them, or should I just put it in the chat?
I could go ahead and share that. What I prefer also is if you can also copy us on that, so we're able to track that. So I'll take care of that.
Okay, great.
Rebecca, if you're having challenges finding a specific person, I'm happy to give names and numbers and link you up to people as a connector. I love doing that. So
great.
like I know I saw Family Education Support Services. Full disclosure, I serve on that board. I don't think I saw Family Support Center. Full disclosure, I also serve on that board. And then with Osho, with Krishita, if there's challenges getting feedback, full disclosure, I also serve on that board.
Okay,
So
great.
I'm able to, if you are having some hiccups or not getting responses, I'm happy to connect you to other people.
And then what's the best way to reach out to you? Shall I send you an email?
Yeah, I think when you send Brad, or however that Brad will put us on, and then that will connect us with my city email, and we can go from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
And I will say the other thing I was striving to do, and the reason in that sheet where I have those columns trying to identify, I wanted to make sure that I'm having sort of a balance of government entities, nonprofits, private businesses, food waste, hunger relief, to paint a broad picture. So again, if you also have ideas beyond social service agencies, if there's particular businesses that I did identify some businesses, but if there's particular ones that you have in mind, or if you know of some history with certain farmers in the area that you think would be really important for me to reach out to. I realized that within the city limits of Tumwater, there are not necessarily many farms, but I think the other thing that we need to consider is just our local food shed, and that obviously there's going to be farms that are outside the city limits, but that are close in Thurston County that are providing food to the community. So if there are particular people or farms that you want me to reach out to, please share that as well.
Great. Awesome.
And if there are none that are coming to your mind right now,
not personally for me, but I think it is also something like we meet constituents all the time, whether it's, in the grocery store, at community meetings or whatever. And just having, I think, your contact information in our email inboxes will just be helpful so that we can try to connect the dots as those connections get made in real time.
Perfect. Well, if you don't have any other questions about the project, I don't need to take up more of your time and can keep you moving on your tight timeline.
I don't think I have any other questions. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, then I look forward to the next time we connect and I can share some updates. Hopefully at that time I'll have had, a bunch of conversations and have some more meaty things to chew on.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us this morning, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will move on, starting back up at the top of our agenda now with item number 4, Amendment 1 to the ILA with the Regional Housing Council for the Franz Anderson project. Brad, are you going to help us walk through this one?
Yeah. So if you recall, the city council approved an interlocal agreement last year with Olympia, Thurston County, Lacey, to help support the building of the Franz Anderson project. In that initial ILA, there was some language that referenced fiscal, the ARPA funds. And because we have switched away from using ARPA funds for both the Tumwater and Lacey's contribution, they're coming from general funds. We need to update that ILA to remove that reference. And that's what the purpose of this particular amendment is just to update the ILA to remove the ARPA reference. So we're not tied to that particular timeline in terms of getting the funding. So no other change to the ILA in terms of the amount that's being contributed, which is $275,000, or the timeline. I know the city of Olympia is obviously in the process of trying to get the project up and going, but this is really kind of making sure that our support is still there.
Any questions? It's pretty simple. I think this one's fine for the consent calendar. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I would entertain a motion to place the interlocal agreement to support. Oops, I'm under the.
You want me to do it? Or you want? I have it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Move to place the interlocal agreement to support housing element updates on the December 3rd, 2024 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
Is that the right motion? I was confused because,
Oh, that's the packet.
yeah, that's what's in the packet, but I was confused if that's the correct motion. It's Brad, is it part of the housing element within the ILA?
It's part of there was a separate Franz Anderson ILA. Let me just double check the language again. Forgive.
I know why you paused, Michael, because that.
Yeah, it seems I think there might be a mistake in that.
Please correct that. It should read place the interlocal, the amendment 1 to the interlocal amendment with Regional Housing Council for the Franz Anderson project on the December 3rd.
Okay.
Forgive
So
me.
I would.
That was my problem. But
Okay.
if you want to support in general the housing element overall.
So the motion before us is to place amendment 1 to the ILA with the RHC for the Franz Anderson project on the December 3rd, 2024 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. That's your motion?
That's correct.
I'll second. Motion by Councilmember Dolph and seconded by myself. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes. Great. Let me scroll back up to the top of our agenda for our next item, which is an ILA with Lacey, Olympia, and Yelm to update the accessory dwelling unit plans.
That's it. The cool thing is actually, I apologize for that. This is a continuation of the program that we've been doing with Lacey, Olympia, and Yelm, and the Artisan Group, who have produced plans for ADUs. The purpose of this interlocal agreement is to incorporate the energy code updates that were recently approved by all 3 jurisdictions, as well as make some changes, perhaps, I think, to set the square footage of the ADUs to account for changes in state law. I think it's primarily for the energy code side of things. I do know that we have some folks in the community who are very, very, very interested in doing this and want to make sure they're under the current energy code as part of this process. And so all the jurisdictions are currently reviewing and approving this interlocal agreement to continue this particular program.
Yeah, that was the only question I had, was just out of curiosity if how frequently, if they've been utilized yet. Obviously, it takes some time for the public to learn that they're available and that they're what they can be utilized for. But it sounds like there is some interest in the public, which is great. That's why we created them.
Yep. No, we're getting interest. We're getting people to use them. So
great. Do you have any questions, Councilmember?
No, pretty straightforward,
Okay.
right? It's just you're doing updates in for consistency with the state energy code. So I'm good.
Okay. Well, I would entertain a motion that we place the ILA with the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Yelm for the update of the accessory dwelling unit plans on the November 19th City Council consent calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
So moved.
And I'll second this motion by Councilmember Dahlhoff and seconded by myself, Councilmember Althauser. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Great. So that brings us to what is now the last item on our agenda, ordinance number 2024-005, the Development Code Administration.
All right, let me share my screen. So this will be the first time General Government Committee or the council has seen this particular item. This is our amendments that we're proposing to Title 14, which is our Development Code Administration chapter, as well as amendments across the rest of the municipal code that are tied into that. A little bit of background. Last year, the Governor Inslee signed into law Senate Bill 5290, which modified the state requirements for the local land use permit review. These amendments to the Local Project Review Act were intended to increase timeliness and predictability in the local project review process. So they really focused on what can be done or what can be required from jurisdictions to turn around permits faster and those sort of things. So as part of that process, we have until the end of this year to adopt regulations. Otherwise, the state law will preempt our current code. And our preference is, rather than trying to sort out what parts of the state code, how they react to our current code, we prefer just to have a brand new code in place that addresses the state requirements and makes it easier for us to update all the other materials that we need to do for application submittal. That includes our checklists and our applications and all of those things. So the Planning Commission held a public hearing last night. They took some public testimony. We received one comment letter ahead of the hearing. And after deliberations, recommended the City Council approve the ordinance subject to some conditions that I'll get into as we go through the discussion. As I mentioned, the amendments are primarily to modify Title 14 and bring it into compliance with state law. And as I mentioned, we'll be modifying other portions of the municipal code, and I'll walk you through those. First thing that was done was we introduced some permit types into the process that we currently don't use. One of the big things that we really tried to do as part of this process is to make it simplify the process and make it a little bit more understandable for people just trying to come into the process and do something. And so we decided that we would assign different types of permits to different kinds of things. So type 1 permits are things that are approved administratively by our community development director and don't require SEPA review. So that would be something like a tree permit, tree removal permit, or a boundary line adjustment or something like that, that doesn't require a higher level of review or doesn't trigger SEPA. All of these types in turn have their own requirements in terms of timelines. So this is where it ties back into the state law. Also in terms of what kind of things and processes they go through. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. Type 2s are those land use permits that are essentially type 1s, except they require SEPA review. And then finally, type 3s are those land use permits that require a hearing before the hearing examiner. Things like conditional use permits or preliminary plat or those kinds of things would be a type 3. This is the simplified project review process. I'm not going to walk through each of the things, but I want to just point out the 5 general levels that are part of this process that are reflected in the code. The first is the pre-application process, which is really intended to provide an opportunity for the city to talk with the applicant before they submit, to make sure that all of the permits that are going to be required for the project are addressed and the application materials are understood and those kinds of things. So when we get the application submitted, which is step 2, everybody should be on the same page in terms of what is required and so forth, so we can move more quickly through the review process. The application submittal process is also another area where the state law has changed. There is now an additional requirement that in addition to the determination of completeness that we have to do as part of this process, we also need to make sure that applications are procedurally complete. And that's the procedurally part is the new part, meaning that we have to be explicit in our code what is required as part of an application Rather than to say, for example, we need a site plan, we need to specify what exactly needs to be in that site plan. So a north arrow, legal description, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a section of the code that now deals with that. Part 3 is application review, and that talks about how notice of application is triggered and for what types, how the applications are distributed for review to the other jurisdictions, or like say for example, if LOT has review or some other, or the tribes or other departments within the city. There's descriptions of how SEPA review is done. One of the important things Title 14 did back in the 90s was bring together both the SEPA review and the land use project review. That's still the case as part of all these changes. Application review also includes review timelines, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about that. Phase 4 is the permit decision. It describes all those processes and how those are done. And then finally, the permit appeal process. Each of these types has a slightly different permit appeal process, and all of that is either established as part of Title 14. So another important thing to understand is the proposed structure that is included in the ordinance will replace the entire structure of the existing title. We struck out essentially the whole title. There are bits and pieces that were brought over into the new code, but the more that we actually move things, because we had to move so much things around and make so many changes to the structure, it made more sense just to replace in total the whole thing. As I mentioned, really the intent of the new title is just to make sure it flows from application submittal all the way through appeal and the appeal process. So the first chapter, this is new chapter 1410, deals with some general provisions. Well, I'll get into some details of a couple of these, but these are things that hold true for all of Title 14. And there are things that we just wanted to make sure that there was one place to go to. And for things like time limits and general notice requirements, that's really the important part here. So one important thing I want to point out that's part of the definitions change is that an important change from our current definition of a project permit in Title 14, the Senate Bill 5290 amended the state definition of what a project permit is to remove building permits. By doing that, that really kind of changed the complexion of how Title 14 is, as the way it is currently written. Title 14 covers everything, all building permits. It includes wireless permits, it includes everything across a lot of different chapters. The focus really now, and this goes back to what the state law definition is to focus Title 14 on land use permits. And what that means is it covers approvals that are coming out of Title 16 environment. That's anything dealing with SEPA, anything dealing with critical areas, anything dealing with trees. Title 17, which is our land division chapter, which deals with preliminary plats, binding site plans, and so forth. And then Title 18, which is our zoning chapter. That's conditional use permits and preliminary and other related approvals. Building permits are considered separately and are governed by Title 15. Where we can, we try to relate the two processes. We try to ensure that if, for example, we don't issue a building permit before we have land use approvals, those kinds of things are all still part of Title 14. But just keep in mind when we're talking about timelines and other things, building permits are considered a separate creature as part of under state law and now under our current proposed ordinance changes. Building permits also includes construction permits, and which is also something that's part of Title 15. And that means anything that, say, constructs a road or builds a site or anything like that, that's outside of the building envelope itself. Another change, and this is another important change that came through under Senate Bill 5290, was in terms of time limits, in terms of the number of days the city has to review applications before issuing a decision. And then this is a change that we previously did have time limit of 120 days from the time an application is complete to finish review and issue a decision. But that was it. There was no other thing on it, and there wasn't a penalty necessarily assessed to it. Now, under state law, there is a financial penalty if we don't meet these deadlines. It's a 15% return of the application fee or a 20% review, depending upon how far out of whack we are. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So in terms of those time limits, what's your sense of our ability to be able to comply with those? Like we had a time limit of 120 days. If we didn't meet it, there was no fine or fee for us as an entity, but now there is. Is that concerning to us? Like, do we sort of anticipate being able to meet that time limit, or what's sort of the take on how realistic that actually is, given staff constraints and volume of submissions and things like that?
Yeah, and that's one of the discussions that we had, a lot of discussions with our permitting staff about how that would work and whether or not it was, whether they were okay with the timelines. The state law does require us, does let the city make determinations on some of the timelines to extend them. If we feel that, we don't have sufficient time to do that. There's a cap, however, on 170 days. We can't go beyond that. But we can make changes as we think are necessary. Now, one of the things that came that's currently part of Title 14 that we brought over again is in the intent statement, we also the timelines are the maximum, and also it's not our goal. Our goal is to get the permits out if they meet all the requirements, if everything is in place as quickly as we can. And that has not changed. One thing that we do have, and that we'll probably be able to, we will be using more, depending upon the quality of the submittals that we get and so forth, is the ability to stop the clock. Meaning that this timeline can be stopped if, for example, there's missing information in the application, or there's insufficient information, or the quality of the submittal is such that we can't actually determine what's being proposed. And I have a feeling we'll be using that more just to ensure that we meet the deadlines and timelines. And also, I think this points to how important the pre-application meetings are in terms of setting the stage of making sure everybody's on the same page before we start the clock. If we are in a position of having to say, once an application is in, doing all that work after the fact to say, no, this doesn't, you're missing this, this, and this, that just extends everything and sort of defeats the purpose of wanting to get the permits turned around as quickly as we can. So we're gonna have to do some work to figure out how to do that. The other important thing is it's a system issue for us. Our current system doesn't allow us to easily stop permits, because what we typically have is multiple reviewers. Say, for example, we'll have comments coming from our development review engineers. We may have comments from a planner or from a building official or so forth. And the ability for us to coordinate under our current system is not perfect. So, one person can't stop. It has to be relayed to our permit manager, who is sort of like the master on and off switch person for that. We're hoping the new system will help us with that process. The other important thing that I like to mention is 5290 also establishes reporting requirements for us now. So now we have to report on how long it takes us to process all our permits on an annual basis. And our first report is actually due in March. So we are now in the process of trying to figure out how to help our system give us that information. So that's another big thing as part of that. It's also obviously a way to ensure that seeing how well we meet the new requirements is going to be part of that. It's also important to understand that the timelines that we're talking about run from the time an application is deemed complete all the way through issuance of the final decision. And that includes all of the public comment periods, SEPA, notice of application. It includes all the time that is spent scheduling and getting the hearing examiner and getting a decision from the hearing examiner and all those kinds of things. One thing that's excluded from that is obviously once a decision is issued and if an appeal is filed, then the timelines are off. That's a different matter. Councilmember Doha.
Thanks, Fred. One question I have as you're going through this and the required changes and then other zhuzhing that you're doing. Do these updates and changes align with feedback that a couple other local nonprofits have shared, like some pain points for their developing? Does this address their pain points as we move forward?
This is the start of addressing those issues. And I think the other important thing is to understand is because this is such a wide change and it covers so many things, I can't promise this is going to be the final solution of how
For sure.
it's done. And I think what it does give us is it gives us an opportunity, especially with the upcoming 2025 development code updates, is to further tweak it to make sure it works better. This system only addresses the land use permit side of things. It doesn't address the building permits and it doesn't address construction permits. And there are a lot of issues that come into play in this part of permit review. And some of those things are code and some of those are process things. And I think we're also obviously taking a look at the process side of things.
Thanks, Brad.
I'm not sure where's the best time to ask this, but in terms of the timeline for land, like if this is a land use permit, I guess how does that sort of square with habitat conservation for things like the gopher? Is if someone needs to do their own HCP, is that just part of the permitting process where we would have to say, no, you have to go get this, and then our timeline has been met because we would deny a permit if someone hasn't done an HCP if there's, evidence of gophers in an area?
Yeah, that's a question that we're still trying to figure out how we're going to handle that, because we, under the current system and under the new system, we would have the ability to pause review if somebody submits an application that requires outside approval. However, there are timelines that are included in here that how long we can pause, meaning that if we're still in the process of trying to get our HCP through, and that may be a multi-year process, can we really accept a permit and let it sit until we get that final approval? That's one of the things that we're trying to sort out, the best way to try to address those things. But the intent is really whatever the timeline is would be able to account for such things as outside approvals that would be needed.
Okay, thanks.
In addition to the amendments that we made in that first chapter, we've also updated our public notice requirements. The substantially different proposals really deals with situations where we have a permit application in for review that changes to such a degree, either through requirements of our own or from the applicant, that it's a different proposal from what was originally submitted. It's bigger, it's a different use, those kinds of things. And we also deal with permit expirations and code interpretations, which aren't currently dealt with in Title 14, but we thought we need to have a process explained for that. Title 1412, Chapter 1412 deals with land use permits into more detail, and I think I'll just walk you through this process. So, in this particular chapter are tables that include examples of each of the permits, a table that lays out the recommendation, decision, and appeal authorities for each of the permit types, and most importantly, explains what the new regulations are in terms of the timelines for review of each of those things. So, for example, this first table is dealing with application types. As I mentioned, type 1s are boundary line adjustments or preliminary short plats or things like that that don't require a SEPA approval, all the way down to things that require going to a hearing examiner, like a plan unit developments and so forth. All of those types then are laid out in a decision and appeal authority table. So on this table, on the far left-hand side are the permit application types, 1 through 3. Each of those has a particular recommendation authority. So the DRC is our Development Review Committee, which is made up of our community development staff and our development engineering staff who meet, review applications together, and provide a single set of comments and so forth, single set of recommendations. Those recommendations, in the case of a type 3, go to the hearing examiner for a hearing. There isn't a hearing for type 1 or type 2s. The final decision authority for type 1 and 2s is the Director of Community Development. And the final decision authority for type 3s is the hearing examiner. For appeals, for types 1 and 2, they go to the hearing examiner. So if a person disagrees with a decision, that appeal goes to a hearing examiner. He hears the appeal and issues a decision on that. For type 3s, that falls under the Land Use LUPA Act, which is a 21-day window to appeal directly to Superior Court. That process is the one we currently follow. This just does basically just puts it down in writing. The next important thing is about the public notice requirements. And we're talking about starting from the beginning of the determination of whether an application is complete, to notice of application, which is letting the public know that an application is in process, notice of hearing if there's one required, and finally a notice of decision. Type 1s under the new state law are excluded from the determination of completeness process and the notice of application process. We can't issue a required comment period on a type 1 permit. And for limited cases, I think that's okay. There are things, the issue I think we may run into is under our current system. When we raised our SEPA thresholds, we also included a process by which the community and the tribes were notified of those applications that were above the minimums on the SEPA exemptions in the state level, up to the point of where we had the optional level. So say, for example, if short plats were at the minimal level of state exemptions was 4 lots, ours was allowed to go up to 9. We would issue a notice of application for those permits between 4 and between 5 and 9 lots as a courtesy. We can't do that under state law. So now we're going to be, we're thinking of alternative means of letting people know things are there. We can't require a comment period or anything like that. So we're trying to figure that out. The other, and this is back to the whole review time frames. For type 1s, state law says we can have 75 as a minimum. We can go above that based on our conversations on how long our permitting process is taking and other considerations. We're going to propose 90 days. There are some special exemptions under state law that are reflected in our code. Say, for example, if we have a complete final plat application, we have only 30 days to turn that around. Type 2s, I believe state law is 100 days. We're going to propose 120 because the SEPA process adds an additional comment period and a few other things. And we just want to make sure that we can accomplish all those things within the required timeline. Type 3s, 170 days. There is a RCW that says preliminary plats have to be turned around in 90 days. We are obviously trying to do that, but given that it requires a hearing and the notification and all that, 90 days is really not possible. Now, there are exemptions. As I mentioned, some things that are exempt from these time limits that, first of all, we have an initial 28 days of review to make sure an application is complete or not. That's ahead of the start of these timelines. We can also, as I mentioned, stop the clock if we need to request additional studies or additional information or to correct plans. And the appeal periods are also outside of this timeline. The next chapter deals with the pre-application process and the application itself and determination of completeness. We currently require that applicants attend a pre-application meeting in order to walk through what the project is being proposed and also what all the requirements are for the applications. It's a 2-part process. The second meeting can be waived if everything is in order and they can go right to submittal. Really, this is also a means for us to shorten that 28 days up front for a determination of completeness by really sort of working out those details. There's a feasibility review study, which is voluntary, and it's usually a applicant can come in and propose this, talk about what they're proposing to get a general idea of what they are going to be required to do. The determination completeness process, as I mentioned, has been changed substantially. The procedurally complete part is now much more important. So the chapter in the section in this chapter that deals with the definition of all the elements that are required is probably very lengthy, and is it deals with everything. What it means, however, is we have a base that we can in turn modify and shorten depending upon the permit type. So what it doesn't say is the type 1 has to submit all this information. The type 1 can be narrowed down by our submittal materials and our checklists. So we sort of start with the everything and cut it down as to what we truly need. The next part is dealing with application review process. The determination of consistency carries over from the existing code. That's important because what that is every one of our permits needs to ensure that not only does it meet our current development regulations and standards, but also it has to meet our comprehensive plan. Meaning that if our comprehensive plan says something that is contrary to what is being proposed, the comprehensive plan carries weight as part of the development review process, and an application could be denied as part of that. For the most part, what's in the comprehensive plan is translated into our development regulations, but there are some instances, say for example, park requirements, those kinds of things that exist outside of development regulations. Application review also includes everything dealing with SEPA. It deals with the process for getting those land use permit applications out to the other departments and other agencies for review, and also explains the notice of application process, which is for type 2s and 3s, is the notice that goes out to the public that an application is currently in for review and establishes a timeline for getting comments back. The final chapter deals with the decision process and the appeal process. We're also added and strengthened the code to really for combined project reviews and combined hearings. What that means in terms of combined review is if a project is a large project and requires, say, multiple land use approvals, say a conditional use permit and a few other things, land division of some sort, all of those approvals would be combined into one review process, and it would default to whatever the highest type is. So in that case, it would default to a type 3 and to a public hearing. The importance part of that is it makes sure that all the permits are reviewed and are coordinated for all those permits, and all the decisions are issued at the same time. There are other changes that were made across the different chapters. I'll touch on some of them that are important, but as you can see, it pretty much captures about half of the municipal code. The first one deals with how we handle multifamily housing tax exemptions, the hearing or the contract approval process. We're proposing changes to the multifamily tax exemptions to currently change how contracts are approved, and this is an option that's allowed under state law. Currently, the city council approves those contracts. However, everything dealing with the application itself, from the initial conditional approval to the final approval, is all administrative, and it's all through the director of community development. So it puts the council in a strange position of having to approve a contract, but not have the ability to disapprove the actual application. And this is really intended to ensure that that the council doesn't be put in that position, and that the director approves those contracts. Now, a very important thing to understand also is the larger discussion of the multifamily tax exemption is still definitely on the books, or something we need to talk about, because the program expires for us in 26. And there have been changes to state law that have occurred as part of that process. So we will be discussing the larger issue of the scope and everything else about that as later.
So, Brad, like currently, whenever there is an MFT, like you said, we approve it as a council. Does 5290, does that bill require that now the council doesn't approve it anymore?
No, it's something that is currently allowed in the RCW, that either those contracts can, and the important thing is that you're approving the contract that lays out the conditions for the multifamily tax exemption. You're
Yeah.
not approving the application. So what the RCW allows for, and this is separate from 5290, is for the contract approval process to become administrative as part of the Director of Community Development's approval. So we're proposing that change as part of this process.
Okay, so if that were adopted as it's presented in the ordinance, it would never, approval of one of those would not appear before city council for a vote ever at all.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, the approval of the contract, again, not approval of
Right.
the application.
right, but
And that's-
if we deny the contract, then there is no approved application. They don't get the tax exemption, correct? Like
Right,
we council essentially has a veto over every one of the contracts. And this would take that away.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
Actually, I don't have language in front of me, but under it's set up interestingly. Because once you approve the program, if the application complies with the program, I believe the language is something about you shall approve the contract. So actually, you don't really have much leeway there. So it seems like once you've approved of the program, then it's pretty much an administrative thing to go through and approve the application as well as the contract. There's not discretion about whether or not you approve the contract.
so what would happen if we voted no?
On a contract,
Yeah, as if the council has an MFT before it and we voted no, what would be the result of that?
possibly a lawsuit, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay,
I mean, I think that's why it's so important that the council, review the program, on a regular basis and make sure that it's structured the way that you want it to be. Because then once it's in place, it's pretty easy to administer. And if the applications comply, the statute really is set up to just have everything go through pretty smoothly.
okay. Well, Brad, are you nearing the end of your presentation? We have,
Yeah.
Councilmember Dolph has to hop off in 3 minutes.
Yep. I would like to.
And then we lose quorum at that point.
Yep. I just want to also mention, we made some changes to the zoning chapter, adding a new chapter for site plan review and also folding in some additional things. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission conducted a hearing last night, and the recommendation is to place the ordinance on your December 3rd council consideration. There was an additional caveat added to that recommendation. We received a comment letter the day before the hearing that raised some questions about our timing requiring separation of land use permit approvals being complete before we could start accepting building permits. The commission asked that the council take a look at that further, so that the staff is currently reviewing that, may propose additional changes. We're also looking at the pre-application process, whether or not it can be required or not, and the commission requested that the council consider potential changes to the ordinance as currently written that may address that as well. So those are the two things that came out of the that are additions from the Planning Commission recommendation.
Okay. I don't know how I feel about the MFT thing. It sort of seems like that should be, we need to reevaluate the MFT thing in 2026 anyway. It seems like that's a very large structural thing that should be a component of that reevaluation. I think it's fine for us to have a discussion about it in the context of this amendment as a whole council. I would be surprised if there isn't a request that that portion be removed for consideration, because that's going to blow up the rest of this, and that we need to pass this to be in compliance with state law. So I feel like that merits its own discussion.
Mhm.
I think that I would want to have a more fleshed out conversation, specifically with Councilmember Kathy present too, before recommending that portion of the ordinance. So Councilmember Dahl, if we just have a minute here, I don't know if you have any questions. Okay.
No, I mean, I
Well-
do, but not today.
Okay. Well, I move that we place ordinance number 2024-005 as presented on the December 3rd, 2024 City Council consideration calendar with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. And I will follow up, Brad, over email with some suggestions about the MFT portion of it, and we can go from there.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for a great meeting. We are adjourned.